Have you ever felt like your whole life has been about showing up for others? You reply to every message within seconds. You answer the phone even when your soul is tired. You say yes when every part of you quietly whispers no. You help. You stay late. You hold things together that others never even notice are falling apart. And yet, when the room empties, when the applause fades, when the day ends, no one remembers you were even there. It's self-abandonment dressed up as kindness. And you can't keep living like that. In this video, be your priority. Focus on yourself and work hard. In Silence Vertical Bar Stoicism, we'll explore what happens when you stop chasing recognition and start choosing yourself, not with loud declarations, but with quiet, powerful decisions that no one else needs to approve. If this speaks to you, leave a soft note in the comments. I'm choosing me. Let's begin. 1. You've been useful but never seen. Have you ever lived so gently, so helpfully, so dependably, that people stopped noticing you altogether? Not because you were invisible, but because your presence was expected, like air, like background music, like the door that always opens without needing to be thanked. You were always there, always saying yes, always making it easier for someone else to breathe. Liam never liked taking up space. He didn't raise his voice in meetings. He didn't interrupt. He didn't shine too brightly. But he showed up every time. He was the one who stayed late when a colleague missed a deadline, the one who fixed the server crash at 2 a.m. without ever complaining, the one who listened, solved, supported, quietly, thoroughly, without asking for anything in return. When a teammate was promoted for a project Liam had rebuilt in silence, he smiled. He said, "Congratulations." He moved on. He didn't expect a thank you, but sometimes he wished for one. At the company party, someone passed around cake and casually mentioned that Liam's birthday had been yesterday. There was a pause. Then someone laughed and said, "Well, we missed it again, huh?" Another chuckle. Someone poured champagne. The moment moved on, and so did everyone else. Liam smiled too, but in the corner of his chest, something shifted like a quiet drawer that had been left closed too long. There are people like Liam in every room, people who fold themselves into the background, not because they're weak, but because they've learned that usefulness keeps them accepted, that as long as they're helpful, they belong. That silence is safer than asking for space. Modern psychology calls it the self-sacrificing schema, learned belief that your worth is earned only through service to others. It starts small, a favor here, a skipped meal there, a silent nod when you want to say no. But over time, it becomes a reflex. You serve not because you want to, but because saying no feels like betrayal, like failure, like you're taking up too much room in a world that never asked for you to be loud. So you shrink, you accommodate, you become a master of being enough for every except yourself. And then one day, you wake up in a life where your calendar is full, but your soul is empty. You've become the switch that others flip when they need something. You light up when called upon, then dim, then disappear. And slowly, quietly, you start believing that maybe you're only worthy when someone else needs you. But that's not love. That's labor. That's not value. That's usefulness. And usefulness, as the Stoics would remind us, is not the same as worth. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more. That is poor. Seneca, when your worth is tied to applause, you become addicted to echoes. When your peace depends on praise, you will always be at the mercy of someone else's silence. Liam didn't want a parade, but he wanted someone to ask if he was okay without needing something from him first. He wanted someone to notice he hadn't been sleeping, that his laugh was quieter lately, that he had started drinking his coffee black again, like he used to in college when life felt a little too heavy. But no one did. So that night, after another day of quiet efficiency, Liam closed his laptop, turned off his notifications. Saturday by the window in the dark, just him and the pulse of the city breathing below. And for the first time in years, he didn't think about what was due tomorrow, or what someone needed, or how to fix what wasn't his to fix. He thought about something else, something quieter, but heavier. He whispered it to no one. If I disappeared, would anyone feel the silence? But sometimes, the wound isn't that they didn't see you. It's that somewhere along the way, you started believing you weren't worthy of being seen at all. 2. The lie you've been sold that your worth depends on others. Elise used to count her value by numbers, not grades, not hours studied, but numbers that lit up on her phone screen: likes, comments, views. Every post was a question, every selfie a soft cry for confirmation. Am I enough today? Did you see me? Did I make it into your world, even for a second? She was a media student, a storyteller by nature. But somewhere along the way, the story stopped being hers. It became a performance crafted, not from what she believed, but from what would be shared. What would be praised? What would land her in the recommended tab of someone else's scroll? And in a world where visibility feels like currency, Elise became rich in attention, but bankrupt in peace. She didn't realize how much she was losing until the algorithm changed. One morning, her post didn't perform. The likes stalled, the comments vanished. She checked her phone again, then again, every 5 minutes, like a wound she couldn't stop picking at. But nothing came. No heart emoji, no fire reaction, no applause from the silent crowd she had built her life around. And just like that, she felt erased. We don't talk about it often, but this is one of the cruelest lies we've inherited from the modern world, that your worth is only as real as the response it gets. That unless someone claps, your effort doesn't count. That if no one sees you doing it, maybe it was never worth doing in the first place. And the tragedy? We start believing it. We tailor our words to please the crowd. We shrink our honesty to fit in polite captions. We rehearse our joy to make it look more effortless. And over time, we drift further and further from ourselves, until we forget what it even felt like to do something purely for its own sake. But the Stoics never needed applause to keep going. They didn't write to be shared. They didn't live to be liked. They spoke the truth even when it made them look strange, or difficult, or out of step. If you want to improve, Epictetus said, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Now, let that settle. Be content to be misunderstood, to not explain yourself, to walk through the noise without offering a single footnote. It's not easy. Elise struggled with it too. The first time she posted something raw, no filter, no polish, she felt exposed. A voice inside whispered, they won't like this. You'll lose them. And maybe she did. A few unfollows. A few people skipped past. But, for the first time, she didn't check. She closed the app, took a breath, and let the silence be the answer. Because silence doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you're learning to hear yourself again. There's a deeper kind of worth that no one can measure for you. It's not in your feed. It's not in your inbox. It's not in someone's clapping hands. It's in the quiet knowing, I did this because it mattered to me. I said this because it was true. I chose this path, even when it wasn't trending. That's not arrogance. That's integrity. And if the world doesn't understand it, maybe the world isn't meant to. So ask yourself gently, who have I been performing for? What part of me has been waiting for permission to simply be real? And if no one claps when I become myself, can I still keep walking? because that's the question Elise had to face. And maybe it's the one you're facing now, too. And if you've ever felt like her, even for a moment, if your voice has ever trembled because it wasn't echoed back then, maybe this is your moment to stop waiting. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to be liked first. Just whisper it to yourself, or leave it here for others to feel less alone. I'm choosing myself today. Because when you begin to see that your worth doesn't come from the gaze of anyone else, the real question becomes, if I choose me and no one claps, will I still stand? And if the answer is yes, then you've already started becoming free. 3. You don't need permission to choose yourself. There comes a point in life when the loudest resistance is no longer outside but inside. It's not the world yelling at you to stay in line. It's your own voice whispering, what if they're right about you? It's hard to walk away from a life that looks safe, even harder to walk toward one that has no guarantees. But sometimes the biggest risk isn't in the leap, it's in the staying. Jaden used to live between the two. He worked mornings behind the counter of a quiet coffee shop where he made beautiful foam art for people who never asked his name. And at night, he wandered the city with a second-hand camera, chasing stories that didn't pay but made him feel awake. His father, a retired engineer, called him a dropout with no direction. His friends called him romantic, idealistic, a dreamer. He laughed it off. But deep down, a part of him started to wonder if maybe they were right. The nights were the hardest, not because they were empty, but because they were full of doubt. There were evenings he hovered over job listings, ready to give up, ready to slip back into something familiar, something that would make his parents proud and his friends comfortable. He told himself it wasn't fear, but the truth is, he wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of becoming someone they couldn't understand. Sometimes we confuse loyalty with self-abandonment. We stay in roles we've outgrown. We repeat patterns that leave us hollow, not because they fit, but because they make other people feel okay. We learn to silence our gut in exchange for the comfort of being accepted. And yet, the Stoics remind us, no one else is living your life. No one else is dying your death. If you don't choose yourself, they say, someone else will choose who you become. Jaden didn't wake up one day full of certainty. His revolution was quiet. It began with a small no. No, I can't make it to that event. No, I'm not taking that job. No, I'm not explaining myself anymore. And with every no, he carved out space for something more sacred, his yes. Yes, to long walks with no destination. Yes, to portraits of strangers. Yes, to sending a photo to a magazine, even when he thought it wasn't good enough. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it to remember what his own voice sounded like. Because choosing yourself is rarely glamorous. It doesn't always come with clarity or applause. Sometimes it feels like walking through fog with only your instinct for light. But each time you honor that quiet pull, each time you trust what doesn't yet make sense, you become someone you can live with. The moment Jaden stopped justifying his path, something strange happened. His parents didn't change, his friends didn't understand, but the ache in his chest, the one that came from betraying him, began to soften, and slowly, something else took its place. A stillness, a quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't ask for approval anymore. So ask yourself gently, what have you been asking permission for? And who told you that you needed it in the first place? Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is decide you are already allowed. You don't need their blessing, you need your own. And when you give it, you'll realize that freedom doesn't always feel like flight. Sometimes it feels like a quiet seat at your own table. But there are some people who don't need to be seen to know they're on the right path. They don't announce their name. They simply keep showing up in silence until the world has no choice but to notice. 4. The silent rebellion. Work in shadows, rise in light. Some of the most powerful work in this world was created quietly. No press release, no live stream, no behind-the-scenes tour. Just a soul doing what it was meant to do alone, unseen, unwavering. We live in a time where even the first step must be witnessed. A project hasn't begun unless it's been tweeted. A change isn't real until it's been announced. But what if the deepest transformations are the ones that happen in silence? Rick Rubin never chased the spotlight. He didn't decorate his walls with awards. He didn't fight for followers. He simply listened to artists, to sound, to silence itself. With no social media, no need to be first, and no interest in being loud, he became one of the most influential music producers of our time. From Johnny Cash to Kanye West, Adele to Red Hot Chili Pepper didn't just polish their songs. He pulled something out of them they didn't know was there. And yet, he did it quietly. No theatrics, no performance, just presence. Rubin once said, "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to make something that mattered." That's the rebellion. In a world obsessed with recognition, he chose resonance. Most people don't realize this, but when you speak too soon, when you share too early, you leak power. There's a kind of spiritual erosion that happens when you trade creation for validation. The moment you announce your plans, your brain releases dopamine. It feels good. Encouragement floods in. But something else begins to wither. Your urgency, your hunger, your fire, because your mind mistakes the applause for arrival. The Stoics warned us about this in subtler ways. They didn't shout what they were building. They built it. And then, one day, it stood. Rubin understood that too. He didn't post studio photos halfway through. He didn't tell you what he was about to do. He let the record drop. And when it did, it wasn't noise. It was weight. It was silence, transformed into sound. There's a strength in withholding. In letting your progress grow roots before anyone else sees the branches. In working through doubt, failure, and draft after quiet draft without seeking a single round of applause. It's not secrecy. It's sovereignty. So what does this mean for you? Maybe it means holding your idea a little longer before sharing it. Maybe it means resisting the urge to broadcast every step. Maybe it means trusting that your work will speak when it's ready, and until then, it's yours to nurture, not to perform. Let the world discover you by your results, not your promises. Let your silence become the stage from which your truth will rise. And if people wonder where you've gone, let them. You're not gone. You're building. You're becoming. You're just doing it quietly, like all the ones who truly last. Because the ones who rise in light are almost always the ones who first labored in the dark. But some people don't need to be seen to know they're on the right path. They don't announce their name. They just keep working until the world has no choice but to notice. You don't need to prove yourself to the world. But there's one thing you must protect. Don't let the world steal your attention before you've even lived one day for yourself. 5. Focus is your new freedom. Some mornings feel like they've already been taken before you even get out of bed. Your eyes barely open, and already something pulls at you. A notification, a headline, a flickering thumbnail promising 10 seconds of amusement. It's gentle at first, but then 20 minutes vanish, then 40, and suddenly your day doesn't feel like yours anymore. That's what was happening to Zoe. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't unmotivated. In fact, she had a list every night, neatly written, read 10 pages, finish her design draft, stretch before checking her phone, but every morning, that same loop would swallow her whole. Just a quick scroll on Instagram, just one YouTube short, just one more swipe on TikTok. Her fingers moved faster than her mind could catch up, and by the time she tried to return to herself, the thread was gone. And worst of all, she blamed herself. She told no one. But in her heart, she carried this guilt as if her lack of focus was some failure of discipline, some defect in her will. But the truth wasn't that simple. Zoe wasn't just distracted, she was hijacked. Neuroscientists call it dopamine dependency system, where your brain, trained by algorithms, learns to crave constant novelty. Your mind, once open and vast, becomes a hallway of flashing lights. It forgets how to stay still. It forgets how to stay anywhere, because every swipe gives you a reward. Every ding triggers anticipation. Every scroll numbs the silence, until you can't even sit with a thought without reaching for escape. The Stoics never had smartphones, but they understood this hijack of the soul. They knew that your life will always flow in the direction of your attention, and if you don't control it, someone else will. Epictetus saw it long before we had screens. If someone tried to hand over your body to a stranger, you'd be furious. Yet you hand over your mind to anyone who comes along. That was the mirror Zoe didn't know she needed. Because it wasn't about the phone. It wasn't about the apps. It was about ownership. Zoe didn't want to live that way anymore. She didn't want to wake up and already feel behind. So one day, without deleting anything, without making a dramatic announcement, she simply turned it all off. Just for 1 hour. No sound, no screen, just her, a quiet room, and the uncomfortable feeling of having no one to respond to. At first, it felt wrong, like she was abandoning the world, like she was falling behind, like she was being selfish. But minute by minute, something strange began to settle in. Not productivity, not clarity, just peace. The kind of peace that comes not from checking off a task, but from returning to yourself. She called it her silent hour time to reclaim her attention. No pressure to perform, no obligation to produce. Just a pause, a space to ask a simple question. Is this serving me, or is it stealing from me? And slowly, that one question began to change everything. She stopped reaching for her phone between tasks. She caught herself mid-scroll and chose stillness instead. She learned how to breathe before reacting. And perhaps most importantly, she stopped feeling guilty for stepping away. Because reclaiming your focus isn't retreat, it's resistance. It's how you protect what's sacred inside you, your time, your energy, your becoming. So if you've been feeling scattered, like your days are slipping through fingers that don't even feel like yours anymore, maybe it's time. Not for a digital detox, not for a dramatic exit, just for a return. To silence, to presence, to your own rhythm. Because sometimes the loudest noise is simply the one you forgot to turn off. And if today is the day you choose to reclaim your attention, don't keep it a secret. Say it out loud, or better yet, type it in silence. I'm turning the noise off today. Focus is a form of resistance. But what if you only know how to focus until you burn out from holding it all alone? Maybe that's when it's time for the next lesson. The kind of discipline that doesn't punish you, but teaches you how to return again and again. 6. Discipline is choosing yourself every day. There's a kind of strength that rarely announces itself. It doesn't come with big declarations or motivational bursts. It doesn't ask to be admired. It simply repeats quietly, persistently, without applause. And over time, it becomes the very thing that carries you through the seasons when nothing else can. That's what discipline really is. Not force, not rigidity, not a harsh demand from the outside, but a gentle devotion to the self you say you want to become. A quiet act of loyalty. Repeated, after weeks of reclaiming her attention, Zoe began to understand this in ways she hadn't before. It wasn't that her life had changed overnight. The world was still loud, her phone still lit up, her to-do list still grew longer than she could manage. But something had shifted. She no longer waited for motivation to move. She no longer depended on pressure. She had begun to act from a different place zone she didn't even know existed inside her. And it all started with one small ritual. She would light a candle, stretch her spine, and whisper a phrase she chose, not for its poetry, but for its truth. Today, I choose myself again. It didn't always feel profound. Some mornings it felt mechanical. Other mornings, she wanted to skip it altogether. But each time she returned to it, even without feeling, something softened, something aligned. Not because she was doing it perfectly, but because she was doing it at all. That's the misunderstanding most people carry. They think discipline is about pressure, that it's about control. But the Stoics knew better. They didn't see discipline as self-punishment. They saw it as liberation. The daily practice of not betraying your values, especially when it would be easier to do so. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter." He wasn't talking about morality in a loud, righteous way. He was speaking about the small, private choices, the ones no one sees. The moment you keep your word to yourself when it would have been easier to break it. The moment you sit down to write even when no one will read. The moment you turn off the noise and return to your breath, even though the world is screaming for your attention. Jaden lived that truth too. The barista with a second life behind the lens. No audience, no deadlines, no immediate reward. But still, every night, he returned to the quiet work. He edited his photos, even when tired. He practiced framing, even when uninspired. Not because he had something to prove, but because he didn't want to disappear from himself again. That's what unites all those who endure, not their energy, not their talent, but their willingness to return, over and over, quietly. Not for results, but for alignment. And maybe that's the question for you now. What is one promise you can keep, not to impress anyone, but to remind yourself that you're still here? Not to show the world you're disciplined, but to remember what it feels like to belong to yourself. It doesn't have to be grand. A single line in a journal, a 10-minute walk without your phone, a moment of breath before you speak. Not for performance, for presence. Because every time you do the small thing you said you would do, you become someone who keeps their word. And that kind of identity rooted in repetition, not reputation, is the foundation of unshakable confidence. No one else may ever notice, but you will. In the way you move, in the way you pause, in the way your inner critic begins to lose its grip. Because the louder the world becomes, the more precious it is to have a rhythm you can return to. Not out of fear, not out of shame, but out of love. A love so quiet, it doesn't need to be celebrated. It just needs to be lived. And if you falter, good. That means you're human. That means you're trying. All that matters is that you return. Discipline isn't about force. It's about remembering, and remembering again, and choosing the self you want to become, again. Until one day, it's no longer a choice. It's just who you are. 7. Protect your energy like it's your only wealth. Not everything deserves a reaction. Not every voice deserves a reply. Not every battle is yours to fight. It took Zoe a long time to understand that. She used to pour herself into everything, every disagreement, every notification, every request that arrived with just enough urgency to make her feel guilty for saying no. She gave explanations even when no one was listening. She made space for others, even when there was none left for herself. And at the end of each day, she couldn't explain why she felt so empty that something in her was always leaking, like a light left on too long, flickering not from one great act of exhaustion, but from 1,000 tiny ones. We talk about time as our most valuable asset, but it's not. Time without energy is useless, and what drains you isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's subtle, like smiling when you want to rest, like being polite when you want to walk away, like answering when what you really need is silence. You can lose years of your life to those small trades. You give your fire away one ember at a time, until all that's left is a version of you shaped for someone else's comfort. The Stoics didn't have to guard against texts and alerts, but they knew how important it was to protect what mattered most: the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." 0. It's not about being numb. It's about not being moved by what doesn't deserve your movement. Zoe remembered a meeting when a colleague made a sharp, public remark meant to embarrass. Before, she would have smiled through it, softened the tension, maybe even apologized. But that day, she didn't. She stayed silent, steady, still. She turned her gaze back to the agenda and left his words hanging. No rebuttal, no defense, just quiet refusal to be pulled out of her peace. And somehow, that silence was louder than anything she could have said. That kind of stillness isn't weakness. It's not avoidance. It's precision. You don't have to explain your boundaries. You don't owe your energy to every loud demand. Your presence is sacred. Your attention is finite. And if you don't protect it, the world will consume it on your behalf. Protecting your energy isn't saying no to everything. It's saying yes carefully. It's asking, is this worthy of my fire? And if it isn't, you let it pass. You let the message go unanswered. You let the invitation fade, and you remain whole. Because when you stop reacting to what doesn't matter, you create space for what does. You begin to hear yourself again. You find clarity in pause and peace in restraint. You realize you don't owe your soul to everyone who knocks. It's not cold, it's not distant, it's just yours. So maybe next time you feel the pull, you pause. You breathe, you wait, not because you're afraid, but because you're done mistaking reaction for power. And if they call you distant, let them. If they say you've changed, let them. If they don't recognize the you who finally chose rest over approval, let them. Because when your energy is no longer scattered across every fire you didn't start, you burn brighter in the places that truly matter. And in those space, quiet, focused, undivided, you remember who you were before the world asked you to be everything for everyone. You were light, you were still, and you were finally enough. 8. Inner stillness in a loud world. You've learned how not to react. Now it's time to learn something deeper, that silence isn't weakness. It's what happens when you no longer need to prove anything at all. Kendrick Lamar doesn't respond, not after backlash, not after praise, not even after winning the highest awards in music. He creates, he releases, and then he disappears. No explanation, no defense, no urge to keep the spotlight warm. What remains? Silence. And somehow, in that silence, he becomes louder than the noise around him. Because when you no longer need to be heard to feel real, that's when your presence begins to deepen. Stillness doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't seek applause. It simply holds space. It becomes a shelter zone the world cannot enter unless invited. The Stoics knew this kind of inner space. They didn't rush to correct every falsehood. They didn't chase every argument or flash every virtue. They knew that peace, the kind that lasts, is not a performance, it's a practice. A choice made quietly, again and again, until it becomes who you are. There is a kind of strength in silence that few ever touch, because we are conditioned to speak, to explain, to make our case, to win the narrative. But not every truth needs an audience, not every story requires defense, and not every wound deserves to be shown. Sometimes, the most sacred things are the ones you learn to carry without sharing. Stillness in this world feels almost radical, because it's not just absence, it's intention. To be still is to resist the urge to fill every silence with certainty, to let something breathe before you label it, to know that you don't need to respond just because someone's waiting for your reaction. It's not suppression, it's sovereignty. And perhaps, more than anything, stillness is a form of prayer. Not the kind that reaches upward, but the kind that folds inward. A silent kneeling before the mystery of your own existence. A moment of surrender that doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. You don't have to call it spiritual. You don't have to name it anything. But you felt it in the quiet before dawn, in the pause between breaths, in that space where no one is watching, and yet something in you bows. To reach that space, you must choose your battles. You must learn when silence is not defeat, but discipline. You must resist the temptation to clarify, to respond, to rush into every fire with your bare hands. And you must understand that sometimes peace means letting people think what they want, because what they think no longer has power over you. You start to realize that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the most grounded. You don't have to be understood to be at peace. And the urge to prove something, that heavy weight you carried for years, was never yours to begin with. It was inherited, conditioned, and now it can be laid down. Because stillness is not what happens when everything finally calms down around you. Stillness is what happens when you learn to calm the storm within, when your center becomes stronger than your surroundings, when your presence begins to speak louder than your words ever could. And when that happens, you won't need to announce your peace. You'll simply live from it, and those who need it will feel it. There is a kind of silence that no longer comes from fear or avoidance, but from a deep knowing that you don't need to carry what's not yours. And when that knowing settles in, you begin to feel something shift. Not everything must be said. Not every truth must be proven. Not every version of you must survive. Because when you've learned to live in stillness, you're already halfway into rebirth. 9. Let the old you die so the real you can rise. You don't need a ceremony to begin again. No spotlight, no final goodbye. Sometimes, the most honest rebirth happens in silence when no one is looking except you. You walk past the mirror, you pause, and for a second too long, you hold your own gaze. Not the version of you that's curated for the world, not the one who knows how to smile on cue, but the one beneath all of it, the one who remembers how many times you stayed silent when you had something to say, how many times you said yes while your heart whispered no, how many times you broke your own boundaries to keep someone else comfortable. And in that stillness, something inside you whispers not with judgment, but with longing. Enough. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop betraying who you've always been. Letting go of the old you doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't require shame. You don't have to burn bridges or make declarations. Sometimes, you simply stop reaching. You stop apologizing for your presence. You stop shrinking to fit back into places you've outgrown. And when you do, the old layers start falling away quietly, like an old shirt slipping off your shoulders. No drama, no announcement. just release. You take a step forward, not in heels, not in polished shoes, but barefoot because you're not dressing for anyone anymore. You're walking without armor, without costume. For the first time in a long time, you're not performing, you're arriving. And there's no need to say goodbye to the version of you that brought you this far. You don't owe that version shame, you just owe them truth. They did what they could with what they had. But now, you're ready to grow past them. And growth doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like rest, like stillness, like walking away from everything that demanded you explain yourself. So if you're waiting for permission, this is it. If you're waiting for the right time, it's now. If you're wondering whether it's okay to outgrow who you've been, it is. It always has been. You don't need to be great. You just need to be honest. You just need to stop pretending you don't hear the part of you that's been whispering, "Let's go." Not everyone will understand your silence. Not everyone will recognize this new pace, this new posture, this quiet steadiness. But that's okay. This version of you wasn't made for them. It was made for the you that's been waiting on the inside, asking for just one chance to be free. So walk out of the story that's kept you small, not to prove anything, but to finally feel what it's like to belong to yourself. And if you're unsure where to begin, start here. What are you ready to let go of from the old version of you? You don't have to answer out loud. Just listen, because the real you already knows. You've spent enough time making everyone else the main character in your life. Enough time picking up the pieces for others while letting your own cracks widen. Enough time answering messages the second they arrive, saying yes when your body begged for rest, showing up when no one asked how you were doing. You became reliable, predictable, easy to lean on, and in the process, easy to overlook. But today, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once. But in the quiet corners of your mind, you remembered. You've been useful but never truly seen. You've been celebrated only when you stayed small. You've poured your energy into applause that never lasted, into people who disappeared the moment you said no, into a world that claps when you're silent and turns away when you speak. And now, it's time to come home. Not with grand declarations, not with a list of resolutions, but with sacred decision, soft, steady, made alone in the silence. You don't need anyone's permission to choose yourself. You never did. Choosing yourself isn't rebellion. It's not selfishness. It's how you begin the slow return to a life that doesn't fall apart every time someone leaves. It's how you stop chasing so you can start becoming, quietly, consistently, unapologetically. So protect your energy like it's your only currency. Let your focus become your prayer. Say no when it costs your peace. Say yes when your soul asks for space. Work in silence. Rest without guilt. Release the version of you that needed to be everything for everyone because they were never the ones who'd come save you. You were. And if something inside you knows this, if a quiet voice has been waiting for the noise to die down so it could finally be heard, then start there. Not by shouting, but by whispering, "I choose me." You don't have to announce it to the world. Just live it, one choice at a time. If you're still here, still listening, still breathing through the weight of it all, then tell us, what part of your old self are you ready to let go of, starting today? We read every comment. Not because we need engagement, but because this isn't just content, it's a conversation. And sometimes, the most powerful conversations begin not with a voice, but with a pause. Thank you for being here. We'll see you again in the stillness. Until then, stay quiet, stay grounded, and above all, stay true.